Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your humble host, Crime Time, back with a brand new video. Today's video is going to be about the 20 top 20 of the most 20 of the most infamous female killers. Before I get started, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, turn on your post notifications, turn on your notification bells so you'll be notified every single time I drop a brand new video. And also, please make sure you subscribe over to my Save Our Children TV channel and subscribe to my reaction channel, which is Charles Reactions. And also come back here and subscribe to Crime Time so you'll be notified every single time I drop a brand new video on my channels. Okay. Now, our first top 20 female serial killer we're going to talk about is Dorothy Punt. And it says, when you try to imagine a murderer, your brain likely conjures an image of a man. That's probably because statistically, as far as we know, women are responsible for around 11% of our murders. But that doesn't make the murderers any less heinous. The women on this list gave have gone down as some of the most terrifying killers of all time. Warning, some of those accounts feature graphic depictions of violence, sexual abuse, and murder. Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who killed over 600 young girls. Elizabeth Bathory used her wealth and position to torture those she considered beneath her. According to the History Channel, Bathory came from a prominent noble family in Hungary, and she married into another one when she wed Count Ferenc Nadasdy in 1575. Sources say she convinced her husband to build a torture chamber in the castle they shared. She is said to have killed over 600 girls, mostly aged 10 to 14, after torturing them by jamming pins and needles under the fingernails of her servant girls and tying them down, smearing them with honey, and leaving them to be attacked by bees and ants. Her powerful position kept her out of prison until 1610, when she moved on from serving girls to targeting the daughters of local nobles. She was convicted for 80 counts of murder in 1611 and confined to a room of the castle that is said to have only had slits for food and air. She died 3 years later in 1614. How heinous. Andrea Yates drowned all five of her children. The story of Andrea Yates, the Houston woman accused of killing her five children, captured America's attention in 2001. Yates was convicted of murder on 5 counts after she had method, method, meth- methodically drowned all of her children one by one in a span of an hour. According to Time, the youngest was 6 months old and the oldest was 7 years old. Her trial was in 2002, convicted Yates of 2 counts of capital murder, but an appeals court later reversed this decision, and she was found not guilty by reason of insanity in her second trial in 2006. She will likely spend the rest of her life in a Texas mental hospital. Aileen Wuornos, who went on a killing spree in Florida. I already talked about this story. And Aileen Wuornos was responsible for the murders of 6 different men between 1989 and 1990. She later confessed to shooting men who picked up her hitchhiking in self-defense after she claimed they beat or raped her, a claim that she later recanted. Wuornos was sentenced to death in 1992 and was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. Her story was paralyzed in the film Monster. Her story was portrayed in the film Monster, with Charlize Theron playing Wuornos. Evelyn Dick was called the Torso Killer. In 1946, some children stumbled upon a torso in the woods that would later be identified as John Dick, according to the Canadian Encyclopedia. His wife, Evelyn, was immediately accused of the murder and put on trial. The couple had been estranged because Evelyn was allegedly having numerous affairs. When her home was searched, police also found the body of her infant son in a suitcase that had been filled with concrete. After two trials, she was ultimately found not guilty for the murder of her husband, despite her father being found guilty of accessory to murder. She, however, found guilty of manslaughter for the death of her son. She was released from jail in 1958 and immediately disappeared from public. Suzanne Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, and Patricia Cornelius killed for Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a criminal mastermind who had the other members of his family to do his killing for him. Suzanne Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, and Patricia Kornwinkel were all members of the infamous Manson family and helped to carry out the group's most notorious murders at the La Brinca and Tate residence. Atkins was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder and died in jail in 2009. Kornwinkel is still serving time in a California prison for 7 murder convictions. Van Houten was convicted of assisting the murder of Leno and Rosemary LaBrinca and recently had a parole overturned by California Governor Jerry Brown. Let me say this. I don't care if your friend told you to help them kill somebody, but your own family told you to kill somebody, kill people, and that's what you did. You know, it's heinous, cold-blooded. Charles Manson was an evil, evil person, and his family actually watched when it was sentenced. You know, and the mother, I don't understand how you go with a plan to help your son kill people. You know, it's scary in the world we live in. It's just scary, you know, and heinous, gruesome, and torturous, and you know, it's predictive. It's not normal to help your son kill people. Just not. Joanna Barraras is a former wrestler who killed elderly women. As a Mexican wrestler, Joanna Barraza was known by her character name, the Lady of Silence, but after she was arrested on charges of murdering elderly women in Mexico City, she was dubbed the Matavagist or Little Old Lady Killer. According to authorities, Barraza would pretend to be a nurse or social worker so the woman would let her into the home, at which point she would strangle them and take their possessions. When she was caught, police said she had listed names and addresses of elderly women receiving government assistance. She was convicted of 11 separate counts of murder and sentenced to 759 years in jail, where she remains today. Jane Turpin was a nurse whose patients became her victims. Jane Turpin began working at the Cambridge Hospital in 1885 and was so liked by her peers and patients that they dubbed her Jolly Jane. She used her time at the hospital to experiment with different medications and drugs such as morphine and atropine to see the reactions in her patients. She later confessed to killing at least 31 people. She was found not guilty by reason of sanity and was sent to Taunton State Hospital for life. Dorothea Prunty, who ran a boarding house and stole the social security checks of her victims. Dorothy Prunty was an elderly woman who opened a boarding house in Sacramento. In reality, she was poisoning her residents and hoarding the social security checks at a racket that made her about $5,000 a month, according to Sectown magazine. Police investigated her home in 1988 and discovered body parts buried in the backyard. Prunty Flat was later apprehended at a hotel in Los Angeles and tried for 9 murders. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after she was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. Puente died at the age of 82 while incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility. Velma Barfield, who poisoned her own mother. The death row granny was a nickname given to Velma Barfield as woman convicted of killing at least 4 people in North Carolina, including her own mother and 2 husbands, according to the New York Daily News. She said she did so by adding arsenic to the food or drink. Although those are the only murders she admitted to, there were multiple other people in her life who died under mysterious circumstances. At her trial in 1978, she claimed the devil made me do it, and that she had never intended to kill her relatives. The defense didn't work, and she was found guilty and executed in 1984. Leonardo Cianciulli famously turned one of her victims into soap. After a series of miscarriages and a fortune teller's prophecy that Leonardo Cianciulli's children were at risk, she decided that she needed to sacrifice other people in order to save them. Over the course of a year from 1939 to 1940 in Correggio, Italy, she killed 3 women and disposed of the bodies. She used caustic soda to disintegrate the bodies, and according to a court testimony, she turned one of the woman's remains into soap, which earned her the nickname La Sanfonifercia di Correggio, or the soap maker of Correggio. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. She died in 1970. Amelia Dyer is suspected of murdering hundreds of babies in England. Amelia Dyer may be one of the most prolific serial killers in England's history. It was discovered in the late 1890s that she had been baby farming or collecting babies to care for them in exchange for money. Instead, she would starve them or give them liquid opiates. She was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor for neglect, but then her crimes progressed to strangling the infants and dumping them in the river. One of those bodies was found and traced back to her. She confessed and was sentenced to death by hanging in 1896. According to the BBC, she is suspected of killing hundreds of babies, but it's impossible to know just how many infants were killed. Nanny Doss killed several family members, including 4 husbands. Nanny Doss killed 4 of her 5 husbands, at least 2 children, and 2 others died of suspicious food poisoning. Her mother, her 2 sisters, and her mother-in-law miraculously. It was until the death of her 5th husband that anyone became suspicious. An autopsy revealed an extremely high amount of arsenic in his system, and Doss was charged with his murder. She would confess to killing the others, but was only tried and convicted of 1 count of murder. She died in prison in 1965. Juanita York smothered her 5 children. From From 1965 to 1971, Juanita Hort lost 5 children to what was assumed to be sudden infant death syndrome. Medical professionals were fascinated by the story and wrote about the family in journals, using the story as proof that the mysterious element must run in the families. According to the New York Times, other professionals called this statistically impossible, and an investigation began. Years later in the 19s, authorities said Hoyt confessed to smothering all of the children. Though she later recanted, she was sentenced to 75 years in prison and died shortly after. Timely Clement appeared to have psychic abilities when she predicted the deaths of her victims. Tilly Clement got quite a reputation in Chicago for her psychic abilities, but her vision always centered around very specific Prophecy. The death of her husbands, according to the New York Daily News, she seemed to know the exact date each of her husbands would die. Police eventually realized that Clement was able to predict these deaths because she was putting rat poison in her husband's food. Investigators found arsenic in all of the bodies. She also suspected of killing neighbors and friends with food or candy. She prepared and she had prepared. Clement was found guilty and died in jail in 1936. Catherine Knight killed her boyfriend and cooked his body parts. Catherine Knight worked in a slaughterhouse in Australia before she decided to put her skills to use killing and skinning her boyfriend, John Price, in 2000, according to The Guardian. By the time police found what was left of his body, some of his body parts had been prepared to serve to Price's children with vegetables and gravy, and his head appeared to be cooking in a pot for a stew. She was sentenced to life without parole in 2001 for the stabbing death of her husband and is still serving time. Mary Ann Cotton is considered Britain's first serial killer. Mary Ann Cotton is thought to be the first serial killer to terrorize England. She is suspected of poisoning at least 20 people, including multiple husbands and 11 of her children. Among others, she was only convicted of one killing, that of her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton, who authorities said died from arsenic poison. Cotton never admitted to any other murders, but was hanged for her crimes in 1873. Stacy Castor poisoned her husband and tried to blame her daughter for it. Stacy Castor is another woman who used poison to kill, but she did some things differently. She tried to blame her daughter for it. According to Syracuse.com, after her second husband died of antifreeze poisoning in 2005, she also tried to kill her daughter with a mix of medications to cover her tracks. She wrote a suicide note from her daughter in which her daughter confessed both Castor's first and second husbands. She confessed to killing both Castor's first and second husbands. Her daughter survived the ordeal, and Castor was arrested and convicted on charges of first-degree and attempted murder in 2016. She was found dead in her cell of apparent heart disease. Rita Glusman killed her husband with an axe. In 1996, Rita Glusman was convicted and sentenced to death for killing and dismembering her husband, a renowned cancer researcher, according to the New York Times. She murdered him with an axe, reportedly after he said he was leaving her for another woman. Glusman recruited her cousin to help, and the cousin later confessed to helping cut up the body while she cleaned up the blood. They were caught, but the police also saw her cousin trying to dump the body in the Passaic River. Stella Nichol, who mixed poison with Excedrin to kill her husband. Stella Nichol was inspired by the Chicago Tylenol murders, in which someone added cyanide to Tylenol and put them back on the store shelves, and he said that it was the best way to kill her husband. According to PBS, she put cyanide in Excedrin capsules, which her husband took. After his death, she put more of the Excedrin cyanide mixture on store shelves in an attempt to frame her husband's death as an accident, and therefore got her an insurance payout. Her plan didn't work, and she was convicted of his murder, as well as the of a local woman who bought some of the temper with medication and died. Nichol will be up for parole in 2018. Amy Archer Gunn ran a nursing home and killed many of her patients. Amy Archer Gunn was a prominent member of the Windsor, Connecticut community, where she also ran a home for the elderly in the early 1900s. Such a facility is expected to have patient deaths, but the residents began noticing that an unusual high number of people seemed to die while staying there. From the years of 1907 to 1916, 60 residents died. An investigation was launched, and authorities discovered that she had murdered people by using arsenic or strychnine. Archer Gunn Archer Gilligan was arrested and indicted for poisoning five people at the direction of the state's attorney. However, she was tried for only one of the murders. She was sentenced to life in prison in 1917 and eventually transferred to a mental hospital. She died in 1962 at the age of 89. So that was the top 20 most dangerous female serial killers. You know, that is crazy because you wouldn't think female serial killers would be as intense as a male serial killer. And majority of female killers were killed with poisoning. They were poisoning the men or poisoning other women. Now, I'm gonna tell you why women most of the time will have somebody else help them with the crime. That's lots of time because they don't want their fingerprints on the weapon or they don't want to be a looked at as a serial killer. So they'll have somebody else do the work to try to make to frame the other person for what they told them to do. But back in 1970s and 1990s and 1980s and the 60s, you had a lot of dangerous female serial killers. Back then, it was tragic. Um, and in today's day and age, you have a lot of uh, male serial killers, and also you also have a lot of female serial killers. Um, like, do you ever watch documentaries? Like the documentaries of some of these serial killers and how they profound and how the passion is to kill. It's heinous, you know. Um, you know, all of them was heinous, and you know, the top one heinous was the woman who killed a lot of young children between the age of 14. I believe it was like 14 to 17. It's scary, you know. That's a scary thing to deal with. Um, but you know, crimes still goes on in today's day and age in America. You see a lot of serial killers. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Um, it's heinous. And if you hear me sniffling and the way I sound, I have a little cold. I'm actually getting over this cold, but I still have a little cold. Uh, but I'm gonna say this: back in the days, but you gotta remember too. Back in the days, there was there was no death penalty back in the days. So if you commit a heinous mass casualty, you'd be hanged. Other times, you could be, what I'm saying, shot at by police and killed. So, you know, back then, people thought it was cool to commit, you know, capital murders and commit, commit multiple murders because back then, if you kill people, you wouldn't get caught because there was no technology back in the days. So the police would have to talk to witnesses to try to identify you by the way you look dress, the way you wore, the way. So back then, there was not a lot of things back then that we have today. So you wouldn't have. Um, Back then, it was totally different. But these top 20 stories are crazy. Um, on Wednesday, okay, on Wednesday, let me put myself a little note because I'm back on this channel on Wednesday, and we're gonna go over the top 20 male serial killers. And that's on Wednesday. So hold on, let me hold on, give me a second. Matter of fact, we're gonna do this. Give me a second. Wednesday, we're gonna talk about 7 of history's most notorious serial killers. And we're gonna do the male edition. And we're gonna talk about their stories. Um, you know, like, comment, subscribe, turn your post notifications on this channel. Also subscribe to my Say About Children channel, and go to my reaction channel, Charles Reactions. Go over there and subscribe over there, so you'll be notified every single time I drop a brand new video and content on my channels. Um, I just I love doing I love doing what I do. I love giving you guys content and information that I didn't know, that y'all probably didn't know, that y'all know, and I didn't probably know. So, you know, documentaries are, I love watching documentaries. And because then I know back then what they didn't have that I know that they have today, and vice versa. So, for me to you guys, I love you guys so much. Until next time, stay happy, stay blessed, and always remember, have a smile on your face. Peace.